Mic check 1, 2. Mic check 1, 2.
Good morning. We'll call the March 15, 2024 Revenue Estimating Conference to order. All members are present. First thing on the agenda is to approve the agenda.
Make a motion.
Second.
Motion second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That's approved. Next thing is to approve the minutes from the December 2023 meeting.
I'll move that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that is also adopted. Next thing up, I'll go to Director Acton for her remarks.
Okay, thank you. The national economy has performed stronger than expected this past year, although current economic metrics continue to make it difficult to predict the future in the short term, with many conflicting variables. National GDP is strong, with the fourth quarter 2023 coming in at 3.2%. Retail sales have been decreasing towards baseline levels, with February 2024 being reported at 2.7% over the prior 12 months, which is down from 3.2% in December and 10.4% in November of 2022. Consumers account for approximately 70% of the total national economy. According to the Conference Board's measure, consumer confidence declined in February 2024 from 110.9 to 106.7. However, this measure had grown the prior 3 months in a row. Although inflation has continued to moderate, overall prices remain high. One factor that influences consumer confidence is gas prices. Currently, the oil supply continues to remain high, but refinery shutdowns have caused gas prices to increase in recent months. Currently, the national average is $3.39 per gallon. Iowa's housing sector continues to be in a downward trend due to the increased interest rates and cost of building materials and labor. Iowa house prices have increased 5.9% over the most recent 4 quarters, and rental costs have risen. However, single-family housing permits in Iowa on an annual basis have increased 11% between September 2023 and January 2024. If the Federal Reserve would move to cut interest rates later this year, it is anticipated that manufacturing activity and housing production may pick up. On March 12th, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported consumer price gains at 3.2% annually in February, which is down from 3.7% in September and down compared to the peak of 9.1% in June of 2022. Core CPI, which represents inflation minus food and energy costs, was measured at 3.8% in February, which is the lowest since May 2021, and is down from 4.7% in July of 2023. Nationally, the most recent jobs report showed a slight slowing of the national job market, with unemployment increasing from 3.7% to 3.9%. In Iowa, non-farm employment through January 2024 was up 8,900 jobs since April 2023, which was reported at 1.6 million jobs. And Iowa's unemployment rate is currently at 3%. The labor force participation rate in Iowa is 67.3% compared to the U.S. labor force participation rate of 62.5% for the same period. For the farm economy, corn and soybean prices both nationally and in Iowa are down, and drought conditions continue to persist across the state. In February 2024, the USDA reported that Iowa's 2023 combined corn and soybean crop value decreased by 21.2% compared to 2022. Turning to the LSA estimate, Iowa continues to be in a solid financial position, full budget reserve funds totaling $963.7 million. However, state tax reductions continue to slow the accumulation of general fund revenue in the short term. For individual income tax, the top rate was lowered from 6% to 5.7%, while the top corporate rate was lowered from 8.4% to 7.1%. Meanwhile, the introduction of the pass-through entity tax to the state in 2023 has affected the miscellaneous tax and individual income tax lines beginning in FY 2024. However, these temporary increases will be offset during the refund process. These changes and others are included in the LSA estimate. For FY 2024, the LSA is projecting a decrease of $273.5 million compared to the December REC estimate. And for FY 2025, a decrease of $79.3 million from the December REC estimate. And looking at the LSA projection for FY 2026, our estimate includes $700 million in estimated revenue reductions due to the enactment of Senate File 2417 and House File 2317. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pleggy.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Craig. So as a new member of the committee, I first want to thank everybody for helping me get up to speed on all these spreadsheets and documents and so forth that have been put forth. As a banker for 45 years, I've spent my life around budgets and forecasts, but this is a new field. And so lots of things to look at, but I appreciate that. One thing I have always found in forecasting is that sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're right. And even sometimes when you're right, it was for all different reasons than you anticipated you would be right for. So it's consistently things that occur that you don't forecast that happen. So flexibility is a key. And it does appear, as some of the comments have already been made, that Chairman Powell will achieve a soft landing. It will be just the definition of how soft that landing is and so forth along the way. But I've had a lot of experience with the Fed in my years, and I fully anticipate they're going to be very slow at reducing interest rates. Yeah, that is just typically the path. They don't want to have to reverse once they start going down. The market was anticipating a June interest rate decline. That is now changing. The market's now anticipating it'll be maybe after July. So that cycle is with us, and that has ramifications. So when you're in the business side and when you're looking at commercial credit or ag credit, when you start having 7 and 8 and 9% interest rates as opposed to 3 and 4, people look at projects differently and they slow down. In some cases, projects get pulled. In some cases, they get delayed and in anticipation of those rates. And as Jennifer just said, commodity prices are certainly changing on the ag sector side. But I would say mostly as I talk to customers and talk to people that I around, they are pleasantly surprised by the resiliency of the Iowa economy. And, especially with everything that the economy has been through the last few years. And so there is a little bit more caution. Consumer spending continues to be up, but some of that is being financed now on a heavier basis through credit cards and other means. So, it's spending is one thing, how you pay for it's another thing. And so some of those has ramifications as well. So, as we look at the forecast, as I look at the economy in Iowa, it is, again, I'm pleasantly surprised that we've been as resilient, the nation economy as well. If rates start declining, I think we could see it pick back up again.
Thank you. A couple quick thoughts from myself. First of all, thank you to the governor for the opportunity to represent the executive branch on the Revenue Estimating Conference. And as always, the work we do is essential to ensuring that the governor and the General Assembly have accurate revenue information to wisely and thoughtfully make decisions regarding necessary revenue and budgetary decisions. Again, as always, I extend a thank you to the committee members for their thought participation and all the people who prepare the members for these deliberations, including the Legislative Services Agency, the Department of Management, and the Department of Revenue. And welcome to our newest conference member, Jeff Pleggy. First, let me say this. The state of Iowa continues to be in a very strong financial position. And I see that continuing for the foreseeable future. Spending discipline shown by the governor and the General Assembly have served Iowans well. The reserve funds are full at $900+ million. Taxpayer relief fund is right around $3.7 billion. And we have a carry forward from the previous fiscal year. Thanks to this fiscal restraint, I think there is no reason to think the state cannot continue down the path of leaving more money in Iowans' pockets. The employment or business climate in the state continues to be strong. The trajectory continues on an upward motion. The attractiveness of Iowa as a state to invest in and to live and to work also continues on an upward trajectory. It appears the threatening but elusive recession that's been predicted for some time continues to be avoided. We continue to see growth in Iowa's economy, and the revenue numbers into the state support this. In the most recent numbers available, Iowa real GDP grew 4.1% in the third quarter last year. Inflation continues to linger higher than Fed targets, but has dropped significantly from the highs of last year. There continues to be significant infrastructure investments in the state, both in the government sector And in the private sector, the Des Moines Register just yesterday reported that Iowa's number of construction jobs is higher than it's been in over 3 decades. Of note, neither the governor's nor the LSA's proposed revenue estimates will require the governor or General Assembly to open up the enacted budget for fiscal year 24. And again, I would just simply say that Iowa, this as a state, continues to have a very strong economy, and the state of Iowa, the entity, continues to be in an incredibly strong financial position. So with that, we'll move to the next portions of the agenda, and I'll yield to Mr. Plaguey.
So when I look at all the numbers and spreadsheets, obviously FY 24 and FY 25, and look at the comparisons to the estimates in the December 23 meeting, they're not very far off. There's some changes on the receipts side as where they come from. Very little change as far as 24, a little bit more in 25. But where the big change does seem to be in the discussion on that is the refunds, and centered around the PTET, the pass-through entity tax, and I can't remember the other term. It's the out-of-state taxpayers that
The composite.
composite. There we go. And so to me, that's where I'd like to hear a little bit more about that discussion on the refunds and why there is such a difference in what is being projected between the two.
So I'll just address the executive branch and then let Director Acton go. So revenue was estimating in rough numbers approaching, I think it was 600 million. I think it was in the 570 range of taxes that we're talking about in this PTET and composite tax returns. Because of the retroactivity of that, there was a time period where taxpayers, or this particular class of taxpayers, were both making contributions to the state in with their presumably estimated payments, and then at the same time, or retroactively, then the organizations, the entities, were also responsible for reporting and remitting that tax. So there ended up being some double contributions. Again, somewhere in the range of $570-ish million. The estimate from the Department of Revenue was that the overwhelming majority of that would be claimed and returned back to the taxpayers in this fiscal year, that is fiscal year 24. As worked through that, talked to different folks, I don't think there's any doubt that the majority of that does get remitted back, but also it's very common in this particular, like I say, class of taxpayer that they would defer that refund, and some portion of that they would just apply to their following estimated payments. That's not an uncommon practice, I'll say it that way. And then the other piece of that, because of some of the activities that are going on in Congress, this particular group, is also a reasonable likelihood that a number of them may very well defer or apply for an extension rather, and file those taxes later in the year. So they only have to submit once, as opposed to doing it once and then having to resubmit later. So what would that percentage be that fall into those two categories? I mean, that's a really hard thing to prospectively determine. The number that I used was roughly 30% of those refunds that will be available will be transferred to later into the year. But I can't imagine there's much that would not be included in fiscal year 25. So took that portion of those dollars and moved them out of the refunds for 24, and then actually impacted the individual income tax receipts in FY 25. So that was the methodology used there.
In regards to our number, we just assumed that there would be slightly more refunds coming in 2024 than the governor's appointee had determined, but it's a similar situation where that number's coming in, and currently we've been reporting that on the miscellaneous tax line and also on the individual income tax line. But those refunds definitely are something we're anticipating, and we're just anticipating it to be a little higher for 24.
And I should say, I think this is helpful to, it's helpful to discuss all of this just because of the interplay between the years here. But I should also say the agenda item we're on for everyone is to review the fiscal year 24 general fund estimates, accruals, refunds, school infrastructure transfer, and lottery and other transfers. So
I'm sorry. So I don't have any comments on that particular thing. So.
Oh, well, go on. You can do, that's what, can carry on with whatever questions or
Okay.
comments you have, and then we'll move to a motion at some point.
Okay. The only other question I had was on the miscellaneous, and I think it's the same issue. Obviously a big drop off in 25, fiscal year 25, and I assume that again is all related to PTET and in composite. So beyond that, I really, again, when I look at the overall thing, it centers around the refunds at the end of the day. So I don't know if you want my thoughts and recommendations or.
Yes.
Okay, so I would lean toward the DOM numbers with an adjustment of 80-20 on the refunds. So 80% come in 24 to 20, 20% being carried forward, mostly 25. I agree that most of it will happen in those 2 years. So.
And Lori, you calculate the number, or Eric, either one of you.
And on the broader part of that is while you're calculating, I do tend to agree with Craig's comment. Having worked with commercial customers my entire career, there's a lot of deferred tax returns and a lot of deferrals in general. So I do think a portion of that will get pushed into 25.
It should be a plus up in the governor's numbers of around 17, 18 million if I'm doing my head math right. In this case, plus down. Pardon. Right. No, that's not right. It's a weaker number than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's more like 50, 57, I think.
Sorry to make everybody recalculate.
That's all right. That's what we do.
Yeah.
You're not going to suggest any other changes?
No.
So then are you wanting to work off to change the LSA number down, whatever the number is on refunds, or up since it's a negative?
Yeah, I was working off the governor's office numbers, so in that particular case, I think we're changing the 24 up on that one, right?
Okay,
And the 25.
okay. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
Except I moved it up to individual incumbent seats. And by that, I mean I took it out
Okay.
of receipts. Because if you defer it and use it against an estimated payment, what that's doing,
Oh.
it's not creating a different refund.
Okay.
It's reducing the amount you'd be paying in.
Right.
Right? Okay.
So are you comfortable with that though, from the standpoint of?
Just taking whatever this number is and then whatever, moving this number and then the same amount here. Is that your
Right.
suggestion?
Right, so it's both 24 and 25 that they're working
Yeah.
on, right? Yes.
So we increased refunds in 24 by 57.9, and we increased personal income tax by the same amount. Right.
in 25.
in 25. Right. Yep.
So the new number for the refund should be
34.5
1534.5.
to get to an overall net receipts plus transfers of 9626.5 minus 2.2%. And in FY25, the new personal income tax number is 5523.4. The
5523.4.
yes,
Okay.
net receipts plus transfers in FY25 9697.8. That's a plus 0.7% increase.
You mean the final percentage is plus 0.7?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so then I'll restate the motion. The motion right now, because we're dealing with fiscal year 24, is looking at the governor appointee numbers, changing the refund line item from negative 1476.6 to negative 1534.5. Is there any, or a second? Or any, well, you made the motion, I was just restating.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a second, any discussion?
No.
Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it, and the ayes do have it. All right, moving to the next agenda item would be to review fiscal year 2025 general fund estimates, accruals, refunds, school infrastructure transfer, and lottery and other transfers. As we've already discussed, I assume, I'll go to you, but will be $57.9 million plus up in the governor appointee numbers for individual income to 5.523.4.
Correct.
Okay. Any other discussion? Obviously, there's the other discrepancies of consequence is LSA was somewhat higher on sales and use, which I could be comfortable there. And the governor appointee was much higher on by 110 million on corp income. So we want to talk about those or anything else.
I didn't have any more comments on it.
Okay. So then I'll restate the motion. The motion for Mr. Plaguey is to plus up the personal income tax line item on the governor appointee's estimate to $5,523,000,000.4. Second.
And the total.
Yeah, and that will make the total of 9697.8.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You guys appear to have it. You guys do have it. And that is adopted. Next revenue item is what we don't go through the individual tax types. We do set a number for estimate for fiscal year 26. So estimate fiscal year 26 general fund estimates, accruals, refunds, school infrastructure transfer, and lottery and other transfers. And again, I'll start with Mr. Plaguey.
Yeah, so obviously this one's a big difference. And I guess a little bit more color around the LSA numbers. I guess I'm a little bit more down the line of reductions in taxes. You could sometimes increase corporate activity and corporate and personal income tax as well. But so at the 9 number. So just a little bit more about the economic factors maybe you're thinking about or didn't anticipate into that number.
Basically, we took into account the estimated tax reductions that are happening due to the enactment of the 2 tax bills and also into the PTET tax. So we're anticipating approximately $700 million in additional tax reductions for FY 2026, as well as an additional PTET of 400 million reduction, which got us to the number that we have. Basically, that's what's included in it.
Craig, maybe a little more on yours as well.
So, no doubt, I took an optimistic view at a positive 3.5%. And this is really a hard thing to calculate when you're looking this far out. But looking historically, if you assume we have been through a downtime, historically bounce back years run in the +6 range. And again, factoring in the revenue adjustments that have already been passed and signed by the General Assembly and the governor, that obviously comes down somewhat. But with the investments that we see going on in the state right now, including both the private sector and some of the government investments into infrastructure, I think we have made the state considerably more attractive for businesses who are in a position to pick their location to move into the state. And I had a much more optimistic view. No doubt we have to view this in the context of what's going on at the national economy. I don't see a circumstance right now where we're looking at anything, like we looked in the 2009, 2010, or the late 1990s into the early 2000s. I don't see those scenarios. So then the national economy, when I think about, is inflation. Inflation either stays where it's at, or possibly even goes up a little bit. Historically, inflation drives up government revenues. It's not necessarily good for the economy. That's not what I'm arguing, but that's not the decision we're making today. Today we're talking about revenues into state government. And so historically, inflation drives up state revenues. And the alternative, and what we prefer to have happen for sure, I would assume all of us, is that we see inflation renormalize around that 2% range that the Fed articulates is what their preferred number is. Capital becomes more readily available, and we continue to have one of those pops, like we have had in the past. And it's not unusual for the state of Iowa to have a revenue pop that approaches 10%, and that's setting aside the post-COVID pops of back-to-back 11s. So, kind of every scenario I went down here, I came up that I think that transition out of the 25 fiscal year into the 26 fiscal year has the potential to be some rather robust growth for the state. And then I'm not sure I understand, and so maybe we could talk about this as well, is the 400 million for PTET, because this is a one-time where the overlap of the implementation of the tax. So anyway, I'll stop there.
So I agree that it is hard to project. So we're projecting out 15 to 27 months from now. And again, we're going to revisit this number again in October at the next REC. But based on our numbers, what we used was the Department of revenue adjustments and PTET adjustment. We have an accrual adjustment. And then the other thing to keep in mind also, though, is the suspense account. Currently, there would be 13 suspense account transactions in FY 2025, but for FY 2026, that reverts back to 12. So there'll be fewer transactions there as well. But that's where our numbers basically are based on Department of Revenue estimates.
Well, I'm, as I mentioned in my opening comments, I'm still fairly optimistic about the economy. I do think inflation is being a little harder to control than everybody thinks it's going to be. And if that's the case, interest rates will stay a little longer. little higher, a little longer. So I do think maybe that transition in the economy will be a little slower because of that. So I guess my view of it would be a good starting point for this meeting, since we have other times to revisit it, is either more of a flat budget or a 1% increase as opposed to 3.5%, but a positive increase. So I guess maybe to clarify, I'd just make it 1% instead of a negative number. And then obviously a lot more opportunity to revisit it in upcoming meetings.
So the motion is for FY '26 to use a growth number of plus 1% for FY '26. So second or discussion.
And 1%, Eric, would be what?
Excuse me. We're going by the new FY '25 amount, a 1% increase, 9794.8.
And again, I look at, with all the changes going on, I mean, I think a positive in the first few years of all these changes is a real plus to start with, that we were able to offset and continue to maintain kind of the budgeting side of the equation. So again, my motion is a 1% change, is a positive.
I'm sorry, I can't go that high. Right now, we're anticipating with the additional tax cuts coming, and based on the RDR numbers, I would be more comfortable if it was around 9.4. So, Eric, what would that be?
$9.4 billion total for FY '26.
Correct.
That's a minus 3.1%.
I mean, obviously, that's still a fairly significant spread. I am much more comfortable closer to Mr. Plague's suggestion. And I will, and just be a tad redundant here, but and it's so hard, and we aren't provided crystal balls, but I just don't see a scenario where we're not in, a much stronger economy. We look at employment continues to stay strong. Projections are that there will still be, albeit not as much as we've just gone through. We'll continue to see wage growth, continue to see strong employment. To the extent inflation continues, again, that puts more money, primarily through sales tax, but also through that with income, by way of withholding or otherwise, into the state. So I would be more comfortable at something closer to, as he suggested, a 0 or a 1.
And that may happen, but right now we're just, with October coming and we're trying to project so far out, I just feel more comfortable if it was lower than that. So Mr. Plague's gonna have his work cut out to get us to consensus then.
I don't think it'll be negative. So I'd be fine if we started it with flat and just go with that as the start point for the 26. But I just have a hard time seeing that it's going to be a negative number.
Well, I would also suggest that is also sends a positive signal that while our elected leadership continues to look at ways to leave more money in taxpayers' hands, that we still see the state's financial circumstances strong enough to be in that position. So I mean, I could be very comfortable at a 0.
And another option would be just to split the difference.
and move it to reduce, the difference between our two numbers would be what, 470 million, be at 9.5. Since we can't agree.
What was that again, Jennifer?
What if we split the difference and just went with 9.5?
So splitting it would be a minus 17175. Is that what you're saying?
Is that what it is?
9.5 billion flat, 9.5 billion even. Is that what you had?
That was the question, yes.
That would be a minus 2%.
I mean, again, I think anything close to flat is going to be a victory of all the changes that have gone on. So I'd still be more comfortable at flat.
We could revisit this in 6 months, which of course mitigates in both directions. So it is just setting a, sort of a benchmark out there.
How about if we go with the -1 instead of the middle of the ground?
What would that be, Eric?
The hardest thing for me to get my arms around is just this PTET and just the one-time event of it. And so I think we have a lot clearer picture of that next meeting. So.
$9,600.8.
I'm okay with that if we want to make that the proposal.
I can be comfortable there if you can.
Yeah, although that's higher than where the LSA would prefer to be for consensus purposes, I'll vote for that. I'll second.
Okay, so the motion is to FY '26 for the final number to be 9,600,000,000.8, which is a minus 1% growth from the preceding year. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it, and that is adopted. So our last item on the agenda is for fiscal years '24 and '25 gambling revenues transferred to other funds and interest earned on reserve funds and transferred to the Rebuild Iowa Infrastructure Fund. And since they're the same numbers, Mr. Pleggy, you may pick the governor's appointee or the legislature's number.
Let's go with the legislature's number.
Second.
Second, do we have any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And that motion is adopted. Is there any other business? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.